than Labour and the Lib Dems by the end of next Parliament. Well, earlier today I talked to Nicola Sturgeon and I asked her whether the SNP's claim of ending austerity really added up.
If you're referring to the IFS report today when you talk about independent assessment, I don't accept much of the underpinning assumptions made in the IFS report. Well, I'll come on and explain it, but interestingly, Ed Miliband today has said that he thinks the IFS is underestimating the cuts that Labour will make. But let me give you three ways in which I think the IFS have got it wrong about the SNP plans. Firstly, our tax proposals are broadly similar to Labour's in terms of where we would increase revenue. The IFS doesn't credit the SNP with any of the revenue of that. They don't credit the SNP with any of the revenue coming from a crackdown on tax avoidance. They actually praise us for being the only party not to simply make up a figure, but then they don't give us any credit for cracking down on tax avoidance and give the other parties all of the credit of their made-up figures. But thirdly, and perhaps most substantially, they assume that in 2019-20, the SNP would want to see borrowing at 1.4% of GDP. That's not our plan. Our plan at that year is to have borrowing at 1.6% of GDP. So, you know, on the first page of, or the first couple of pages of the IFS report today, it says the SNP will have real terms increases in spending, total spending, in each year of the next Parliament. That's the position. I'm not proposing cuts, I'm proposing spending increases.
The other choice then that you're putting on the doorsteps repeatedly, you keep claiming you want to keep the Tories out, but you're trying to take, understandably, you want as many people to vote SNP as possible in Scotland, but by claiming again and again you want to keep the Tories out, you're obviously trying to maximise the number of seats you take off Labour. Now, Labour is the only party who could beat the Conservatives outright.
You know, the hard reality here is it's not... This election won't be decided and the next government won't depend on who is the largest party. It depends on who commands a majority. If the Tories can't command a majority because there are more anti-Tory MPs, whether that's Labour or the SNP or Green or Plaid Cymru, than there are Tories, the Tories won't be the government if those parties work together.
And can you foresee a situation where you would prop up a Labour government if Labour did not have the largest number of seats?
That's what I've been saying. Even if the Tories are the largest party, if there is an anti-Tory majority, my offer to Labour is to work together to keep the Tories out.
Irrespective of, even if the Conservatives have 10, 20, 30 more seats.
But governments in the House of Commons are about who can command a majority. If there is an anti-Tory majority, yes, that's what I've been saying all along. I'm not sure why there's any confusion about it, that we would offer to work with Labour to stop the Tories getting back into Downing
Even
Street.
if the Conservatives are the biggest party in terms of seats by 10, 20, 30, 40 seats, but can't command a majority.
If they can't command a majority, they can't be a government. That's the kind of basic rule of how governments are formed, I would have thought.
Would you be prepared, on point of principle,
to
defeat a Queen's speech or a budget and possibly bring down a government? Would you be prepared to collapse a Labour government?
You know, I'm assuming you're familiar with the Fixed Terms Parliaments Act. Under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act in the House of Commons, and this is where minority government becomes, I think, a much more feasible option in the House of Commons than it's ever been before. You can defeat governments on particular issues. That does not then mean that the government falls. There are very limited circumstances under that Act where governments are brought down and a general election ensues.
Would you rule out putting a second referendum in your manifesto next year?
Look, I've said this repeatedly as well. I haven't even started thinking about the 2016 manifesto.
Well, you can think about it now. Would you rule
with the greatest respect, I'm not going to indulge you quite that way. But I've said clearly, if it was to be in another SNP manifesto, whether that's next year or a future Scottish election, and it would have to be a Scottish election, something significant would have to change from the circumstances of the referendum last year to justify asking the question again. And then if I did put it in another manifesto, people would have to vote for that manifesto. I can't impose a referendum on people.
Are you worried about division still being caused by this general election debate? For example, one of your candidates has been caught out having compared unionists to quislings. One unionist campaigner told me he'd been receiving death threats. Now, there are elements in this campaign that are nasty and divisive and that some Scots are very worried about and that English voters look at and think, what is going on?
What? Let me try and answer this question as sincerely as I can, because I don't want to downplay stuff like that, but equally nor do I want to suggest that it represents some kind of majority view. These are a tiny minority of people, probably people that have always been out there, but social media gives them a platform that they've never had
to be one of your MPs.
before. Well, let me try and seriously answer the question. I don't think Scotland is a deeply divided country. It's not my experience of the country. The referendum, I think, invigorated this country. I think it has been hugely positive. I think you see the signs of that in this general election debate. You know, it's not always the case that we have passionate and rigorous debate in Westminster elections in Scotland. We are this time because there's a legacy from the referendum. So I will always condemn, and I'm very often the subject of that kind of abuse online, I have to say. I will always condemn it, but I don't equally, I'm not prepared to allow it to poison the well of the general public debate, because general public debate in Scotland is better than it's ever been.
Nicola Sturgeon, thank you very much.
Thank you.